Welcome to the Mycelium Network podcast, a podcast for early-stage web developers and the mentors, teachers, and communities that help them along the way. Hey, Pamela. Welcome to the Mycelium Network podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. So, I found you when I reached out on Polywork and asked for people that are interested in talking on this podcast, when this podcast was still just an idea in my head. Now we've released 5 episodes. But your story was really interesting. And I thought, I definitely need to get you on the podcast. And then we went back and forth a little bit, and now eventually we've made it. So what I'd like to start off with is if you can tell us a bit about your journey. Where did you start? How did you get to where you are today? So go as far back in history as you'd like.
Sure. Well, I've always been technologically inclined, if you want to call it that way, because I'm from the generation that when I was born, there was no computers. And then when I was a teenager, there was this big boom of computers, but you could not get anything on the web unless you knew how to code, because there were still it was still the time of the Angel Fire websites. So I got through there when I was 14, and that sort of got me started and got me to know what I was going to do with my life in general, because I was so interested in that part of the new world. And I went into engineering, of course, but I hadn't considered mentoring until late in my career. Well, not in my career, but in my college education, reaching out and needing credits to graduate. They said it was easy to get credits if you taught adults how to use computers. It was not easy at all because I had to explain a lot of terminology that I had given for granted. Like, you could not tell these people click on the icon because you were speaking Japanese to them. And it taught me patience, and it taught me to look at things always from different points of view, not just my own. So that helped me a lot to graduate, not just with my technical skills, but thinking about the people that I was interacting with, because the fact that someone doesn't know something doesn't make them stupid. It just makes them different to you, with a different background, a very different background sometimes. And I really enjoyed that part, helping people, because going into work, I found out that's not the case. With a lot of people don't want to help you, just want to advance their own careers. And that I think that's a very important thing for everyone to consider when they start any career, helping around you.
No, I agree 100%. So I know that you've been involved with a whole bunch of let's say community building and community involvement, especially with female coders. Do you want to tell us a little bit about some of these initiatives that you've started, joined, and are currently involved with?
Sure. It started a bit personally for me, because a lot of people tried to dissuade me from studying engineering. A lot of people around me were like, but it's for men. And at the time, I didn't find it offensive or anything. I was genuinely scared about it. But my parents were very supportive. That's why I still went into engineering. But I didn't think about that until I graduated. I mean, when I was studying, because I was one of 2 women in my in my generation of 30 people. But after I graduated, it really started manifesting itself, because in college, no one was really mean to me because of me being a woman. But after college, that's when the hard stuff actually started coming. And I started wondering how I could do something about it. Not change things per se, like, because that's a difficult thing to do on the get-go, but actually helping people like me just not feel alone, because me being the only one of two women in college started repeating itself in all of my jobs afterwards. Like, I was the only woman in the team, I was the only woman in management and stuff like that. And I was like, I cannot be the only woman all around, but we are all feeling that way. So that's when I was first invited to another event that had nothing to do with women in tech specifically, but was organized by the chapter of Women Who Code in the state that invited me. And I was like, oh, this is a great idea. Like, Women Who Code, I'm going to join the one back home. I thought there was one back home because my city was so much bigger than theirs, but there wasn't. And I was like, this is embarrassing. We're one of the biggest cities in Mexico, and we don't have what this little city in the coast has. So I set to doing it myself because I had to correct that. And that's how I started looking for women that were interested in doing this, because I couldn't do it alone. And that's how we started the community. It's now been, I think, like 7 years, and it's still growing, even though I moved out of Mexico, but I gave it to someone else, and they are still going strong, which I'm glad about, because in the first 2 or 3 years, if me or my my co-director just got out of it, it would have died. But now it's so strong that it's self-standing, and it's a good thing. And the main thing, we thought we were going to be teaching new stuff to women, but the main thing was just giving visibility to the women that were actually working. Like, they all had the same story. I'm the only one where I am, but I see that you are all the only ones, so we're not alone.
Yeah. That's interesting. So, I've heard about this. Interestingly, I've spoken to a couple of people before in one of the other podcasts, and they had a very pleasant experience, and I was surprised by that because it was also a female. Because I've heard about this underrepresentation and about Twitter, for example, being very toxic for women in tech and that kind of thing. So I'm not surprised by what you said, but I am sad about it. Do you? So I think I want to dig into that a little bit. So for one thing, and answer this in any order that you feel is appropriate. So for one thing, why do you think there was this idea that tech was mainly for men and not really meant for women? And then since those days, and with some of these initiatives that you've joined or started, do you feel that it's changed significantly?
I think where this idea comes from has been a mystery for me for a long time, and I've been looking into the answer of that. And a lot of the recently surfaced history has told us a lot about that. Because if you go back in time, in history, you'll see that when computers started, it was such a repetitive job, boring job, not a job that would give you status. So it started off as being a woman's job. That's why the first coder was Ada Lovelace, and so much of the history of computers is represented by women, like that very famous movie that came out of the women that were behind the moon launch. But as computers started gaining traction in our everyday life, the jobs started becoming important, and this is the important part. Like, it's not only engineering, it's not only computing. If you look around all of the careers, even design, the most representative people are men. So once jobs become important, women start being pushed back from them, and this becomes more relevant in third world countries, because I think it's easier for you to talk to someone in the US, for example, that has a very positive experience, because there's a lot of laws behind harassment and, in general, being discriminating to women. But in my country, in Mexico, there are almost no laws that protect you for anything. So, for example, I when I was in Women Who Code, I talked to someone in law about this, because we wanted to sort of inform people of what they could do if they were experiencing this. And this girl, this lawyer, told us that there wasn't really anything that they could do in the courts on just representing themselves as a labor in the labor court. I don't know how to say it, sorry.
Yeah, no, I understand what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, because, for example, for harassment, they had to have, I believe it was 3 months of evidence of this happening.
Wow. For
sexual harassment. So, and we're like, wait, 3 months? Like, you have to endure that 3 months.
Exactly.
And second, evidence. Like, the worst harassment you can face, you probably don't have evidence, because not all of your peers are as stupid as to send you messages, like physical evidence of it. It's probably physical or it's probably verbal, and you don't have any evidence of that happening, even though you have endured probably more than 3 months, because you need that job and you cannot just outright quit. So she told us that the best bet was to either go to human rights courts, which was very difficult to win, or to directly go to a CEO of the company and say, this is happening and I'm going to go public unless you help me get through it. Like, sort of threatening the company. And I found it weird that was the only defense that we had.
Yeah, that's scary, right? I mean, if you're, you say it, the reason people would endure this is because they can't afford to lose the job. So you really, I don't know what the right words are, but you really need some confidence to walk up to the CEO and be threatening in that way. I mean, obviously, there's different ways you can approach this and be less threatening about it. But when it comes down to it, in order for anything to change, you do have, at some point, you have to make some kind of threat. I kind of see it almost in the same boat as, I think it's still the case to some extent, but it's gotten better. But how accessibility on the web has always been addressed. People didn't really talk about it's the right thing to do, or people didn't say, but it helps other users. People always ran first to the thing. Oh, but do you remember the court case against Walmart and how much money they were? So, it's always like this legal thing, how you had to, and it's like, oh, really? That's what humanity has come down to. If you want,
that's what has to happen.
Yeah. If you want anything like to just be normal, then you have to kind of go to court about it and make a big, and also I guess it's financially straining, right? Also, it's not free. I mean, sure, you do get lawyers who are willing to do some of these things pro bono, but that's not everybody. So first of all, now you have to find the person who's willing to do it like that. Otherwise, you have to spend your money to take on somebody who then might lead to you losing your job and not winning the court case. So now you're 2 for naught. So that is really, really challenging. And I wanted to leave this question for later, but I think it makes sense to bring it up in this context. Like, for you, as a woman and as somebody in tech, what do you think is the biggest problems in tech? Do you think it is this? Or do you think there's a broader problem, or is there more than one problem and this is only one of them?
Yeah, I think this is only one of them. This is the one that is gender focused, and I'm sure there's a lot of other problems in diversity, like sexual orientation and in general, but I should not speak to that because I'm not involved. But I think if we go to problems specifically with the tech industry, one thing that I've learned sort of the hard way throughout the years is that you should never, and this goes with the mentoring part, you should never aspire to be the expert in anything, because I think it's just not possible. Like, you can be very good at something, but technology changes so fast that if you are expert in something, you're probably just sitting there and being condescending to people. I found that a lot with people that call themselves experts. Like, they're like, everything should go through me. But you should focus on mentoring, on teaching, or just helping people around you, because if you focus in just building your knowledge in this one thing that might not be useful tomorrow, you're just going over, glossing over a lot of very important parts of working in tech, which I don't think, as much as we like to joke about us being introverts, I don't think tech is that selfish of a job. Like, you cannot really isolate yourself, even working remotely. You have to always work in a team, because you can't do everything. There's so much to do in just one single project.
That is very true. Yeah, no, for sure. So I don't know how much you've thought about this, but I'm assuming you did quite a bit, as you are so involved in all of these different causes. So with these problems that we now acknowledge openly here in this podcast, at least, what can we do to make this better?
I think the base, it goes down to something very basic, which is that you get what you put out into the world. A lot of people don't think about what they would have wanted when they started their careers. So I think I see, in not only in tech, in a lot of careers. My sister is a doctor, and she sees that a lot. That if you went through a very hard time when you started, then you're like, I'm gonna make this new guy, go through a very hard time as well, because that's what's gonna shape him. And that's just not true. Like, let's break those kind of toxic environments. And yeah, probably no one helped you when you started, but it would have been easier if someone had.
Yeah, for sure.
So what would you have liked to have when you started? Give that to the people that are starting now, because that makes better teams, and that makes them more confident in working with you. That's towards the new people, but also always think, when you find someone that is evidently more experienced and more intelligent than you, think about it as a privilege, not as a threat. Like, you can learn so much from this person. There's people that I haven't reached yet in my development. Like, I know I'm still not there. Like, this person is so good at what they do, but I'm so glad that they're in my life, because I have learned so much from them. And I think if you have a job where you don't find someone like that, you probably need to move, because you can't be the sole authority. You need to find people to learn from as well.
Yeah, and to that point, what role do you see open source play in this? So for one, with regards to being more diverse and inclusive, but also to expose you to these people that are a step above you. Because within a company, like even in tech, there is this thing that, like, if you say you're at a company for 3 years, people are like, whoa, for 3 years, that's a long time. Whereas, like, in the olden days, if you want to call it that, it was common to join a company after you left university and then be there until you're like 65, and then you would, go on pension. In the tech world, that is like, what? No, that's like you move every 2 years or something like that. But I think for some people it's easier than for others. Clearly, I mean, as some of the topics that we've touched on now. So I wonder if you're not stuck, but if you're at a company and maybe you're happy at that company and you don't want to leave, but you have reached a certain level of seniority where like you're basically that senior this or the senior that of whichever team you're working on. Do you feel like open source can play a role there and in taking you out of your comfort zone and exposing you to people that are maybe in a higher, like they've more experience than you, essentially, so you can again learn from them?
Yes, of course. I think the role of open source has always been crucial in the development of technology, because there's so much work that goes into it just for everyone to learn more and to build up on it. And it brings you closer to a whole other community that you don't have access at work. And it's definitely a way to look for different challenges outside of your job if you don't want to move. Because like you said, it's hard for people that really love a job and don't want to leave. And the culture of, well, it's been 3 years, I have to move. It's hard on those people. But yeah, it's starting your own thing is a very good way to deal with that. Because actually, when I was starting Women Who Code, I was in a company that I was very comfortable with. So I wasn't thinking about my job as something unstable or something that I had to change. I could go do my job and then get out of my job at 5 or 6 and fully devote myself to Women Who Code. It's the best possible moment to go into something open source or into some volunteering work when you are very happy with your day job, because then that's not something you need to worry about after you leave.
Exactly. Yeah, because I guess if you're in a job where you're not happy, and I think by the time you leave, you're so drained, the last thing on your mind is, oh, I'm going to work on this open source thing now.
Yeah.
You kind of just want to get on the couch and just turn on the TV and forget about everything.
And more so if you are doing interviews, because interviewing is like a second job to be studying and doing other things.
Yeah, that's a good topic to bring up. I've asked this of previous people, and I wonder, for you, how have you found the interview process for yourself or maybe for people you know?
Well, it has been hard on my little family, and specifically my right now my husband has a job on Facebook, but he's so good at what he does. But it was so hard for him to get that kind of job because he's not very good. Well, he wasn't at the beginning. He's practiced now a lot more. He wasn't good at speaking English. And then I think it's something that the interviewers don't really value enough, that people need to learn a second language to actually get into tech jobs now. And it's not so easy. Like people in the US or people in English-speaking countries don't value the learning of languages. Like they already know the one that is most used in tech. So that's not like a plus for them. And then in my case, when I came here to the US, I wasn't in as technical as I was at the beginning of my career, because I went a lot into mentoring and management. And that sort of job is not easy to get when you don't have a work visa.
Oh, gotcha.
And and most of my my previous experience is not as valued here. It's a weird balance. Like it's been weird to get used to it. And it's also very hard when you come from a context like mine, like in the city where I was from, because I was the director of Women Who Code. Everyone knew who I was. It's so very different to be here and be nobody. But it has been an interesting challenge that I can tell you for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Though it has given me a lot of more time to do volunteering jobs like the Wheel Project, or keeping just with Women Who Code at a distance, which COVID has made easier because now everyone went online, even for volunteering stuff.
Exactly. The Wall Project, I had a quick look at it. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. I met this woman when I was starting Women Who Code, Elena Olascuaga, And she hadn't yet started this project, but she has always been very involved, not specifically with tech, but with empowering women, because, like I said before, women are pushed backwards in all of the industries, not just tech. And she was baffled by the fact that even though there were a lot of projects that were initiated by women, these women would not speak up about being the main person behind them. A lot of these projects, they just existed and people didn't know that a woman was behind them.
Yeah.
Sometimes because women are taught to be more demure, and that it's not nice for you to go around and say, I did this and I did that.
Yeah.
And that's why they were invisible. And she did a whole documentary about this. And then she started getting involved more in the tech side because, well, those jobs are getting a lot of importance in our lives now. And that's how she started this Will project, because there's a lot of women that go into science careers but drop out at the middle. So the objective of this program was to pair you with someone that was studying so that they could see someone that already went through it and that could tell you that it was possible and just hear you out and hear your concerns about the industry, and basically just sort of cheer you on while you were studying. And it was a very interesting point of view, because it wasn't necessarily someone that was in your specific career, but it was still science and tech, and you shared a lot of the common worries.
Yeah. No, it sounds like a really, really good initiative. I was glad to read about it. That brings me to a point that's a little more positive or happy. What do you enjoy about tech? What do you find interesting? What is your passions? What do you like to do?
Well, I especially enjoyed about tech that the fact that I feel like you know that you're in the right career when you look around you and a lot of the people are just like you. Because I think that most of the people that are in tech now, like working in tech, when they were back in school, they were the weird kid. But then you go into college and you're like, oh, there's more people like me. Even me, that I was like just one woman and just one of two women and the rest were men. But they were very much like me. Like, they enjoyed the same things. They were very open about speaking about what they liked. And you find this very similar mindset. And just finding those teams is very rewarding. Like, I've been talking a lot about the people that go over you and that just advance their careers, but I can actually count those people with my hand. Like, they become like stones in your shoe, don't get me wrong. But the rest of your team is always makes it rewarding. Like, I have stayed in jobs that I find hard to get through the day because my boss suddenly becomes one of these people that just want to step over you. But the rest of my team is so good that I find it hard to just leave the job, because I have built something so great there. And that's what I find so rewarding of technology, that once you find your team, you build a good team, that team is something you want to work with for as long as you can.
Yeah.
And most of them share a lot of your same interests outside of work. And just in general, that's how you find your tribe. I don't know, not status quo, but your tribe, basically.
Yeah. No, I've definitely felt that as well. And I think it's interesting. I listened to a talk the other day, and the person talked about social media and I don't know if you know the person, Yaron Lanier. He talks quite a lot about, he wrote the book about 10 reasons why you should delete your social media today. He talks a lot about, he's involved in like artificial intelligence and virtual reality. He's the father of virtual reality, but he is critical of social media. And the one thing that he mentioned that he found particularly interesting is the fact that somehow GitHub is getting it right. Because GitHub, if you think about it, is a social network in a sense, but it's a social network where there's like what he mentions is there's a sense of ownership and there's a sense of shared responsibility, and it's as if those two things is what's missing from all these other social networks. And that because you have this sense of ownership, this sense of shared responsibility with these things that you build, it drives out a lot of the negativity and the toxicity that you find on a lot of social networks. I wonder what you think about that take.
Yeah, I understand that part, because I think that part about social media, any social media, is that people feel sort of not responsible for what they are posting online, what they're telling you, how they are attacking you. And yeah, I've also wondered about the value in it. Of course, when social media first came out, it was just like the shiny new thing. But now that it's become what it's become, it does beg the question, is it worth it? Yeah, because even though I don't use it much for personal reasons, but a very good friend of mine and I have a podcast about books, and just getting people to listen to that is very hard, because you have to really put yourself out there, and that's something that especially people in tech are not very good at. And but it takes a toll on your mental health if you really get into it. So I do think there's a value in accountability, which most social media doesn't make you face, like the accountability of what you post.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, definitely. It definitely creates the opposite. It creates a veneer of perfection over people's lives that's pretentious and untrue. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize that, and then they measure themselves against this unrealistic expectations. And then if they can't measure up, then they blame themselves for that, instead of understanding that, no, the example that you're looking at is just unrealistic. It's simply not true.
Yeah. I
spoke to somebody the other day where I said this thing about, like he was talking about showing your weakness and how important that is for mentors, for example, because oftentimes exactly this thing is being put forth, that people do these amazing things and just one after the other, and you never see the things that don't work. You never see the 20 times they try to make this thing and didn't get it right. So for mentors, it's important to show your vulnerabilities, to show your failures, your weaknesses. And I was like, yeah, that I totally agree that's very important, and that is definitely part of mentorship. The problem is, even though people talk so much about failure and about failing and trying again, the context is always the people talking about that are the people that's already made it. The people that's already running the $1 billion company or the $1 million company. And you don't often hear people who are still building their careers, building their knowledge, talk about the same things. For them, I think the message is different. The message is hide your failures, hide your weaknesses.
Yes, and that's part of like sort of what's come to the real world of the social media, I think. But it's easy to forget that when you're trying to help someone, that you're being a mentor to someone, you need to also talk about your background. Like, yes, you made a mistake right now. And I know it's a mistake because I've made it before. Yeah, exactly. I went through this and something similar happened. So let me tell you so that you don't need to go through it again. But it's very important to be humble about the way that you learn the things. Like I wasn't born knowing that I should not have said what you just said right now, and I also had to navigate. But I'm glad that you don't have to navigate this alone. Like you said, sometimes it has more value coming from someone that's not Elon Musk, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So touching on that point of people who are insanely successful, has there been any people or moments or events in your life, and you can have multiple, there doesn't just have to be one, you can talk about multiple of these, that you feel has been pivotal or particularly impactful in your life up to now?
Yeah, it's probably gonna sound like really small things. Like at the time I didn't see it as small, but now thinking back to it, it's probably a small thing. Like the first time I was in charge, for example, of a meeting at a job travel, that we had to travel somewhere else to see a client, and I was in charge of the meeting of sort of selling this new product. And I was there with a senior architect, and he would just be there to advise me. He would not participate in the meeting. So after we had this meeting, this whole day of meetings and presentations that I was a lead for, at the end of it, we were just having dinner somewhere, and he started just going over feedback for me. And I immediately got out something to write on, and I started to take notes. And after he was done, he was like, I'm sorry if I offended you. And I was like, what? You were giving me feedback. He's like, yeah, but I've done the same thing for people before. And sometimes I've made people cry or just really angry. And I was like, but you were not disrespectful. Like you didn't say like, oh, you idiot, or something like that. He was really specific about what I had done that I could improve on. And I realized that not only was he good at taking feedback, but I was good at receiving it. And receiving feedback is a really hard thing to do.
It is.
I hadn't thought about that before. I thought back on myself like just 10 years before that moment. And I thought, well, probably 10 years ago, I would have gotten mad that he didn't just say good job or something positive. But I was already experienced enough to know that it was valuable to listen to him. And that's something that stayed with me since then, that you need not only to be good at giving feedback, but at receiving it.
Yeah.
Because receiving feedback always can feel like they are attacking you when they are actually trying to help you.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably one of the things that's tricky with open source. And I think that is why a lot of new people maybe are a little bit scared. I mean, that's my experience from having spoken to a couple of people very new to development, is they really want to contribute to open source, but beyond the tools and all these things that they still don't know exactly how to use, it's more afraid of looking stupid, afraid of asking something that for them is not obvious, but they're scared the other person might think like, ugh, you're wasting my time. Why are you?
Yeah, and that's where the social media mentality comes into play, because a lot of people feel entitled to answer that way, to just be like, that's a silly question. Or the other way around, when you're the owner of the open source project, there's a lot of people that actually think they're entitled to telling you, why didn't you do it this way? Like, this was the better way. And it's hard to navigate that sort of mentality, but you need to take it one at a time, I think, and not lose sight of what's important, because there's always going to be people that react that way. Also in feedback in your job, because there's always going to be someone that is going to give you the wrong feedback or just not know how to politely tell you the feedback. And again, this is because I'm coming from the context of Mexico, but I once had one colleague that's now a very good friend of mine called me out to ask for feedback, and I gave her feedback, and she was like, well, this is not what I was expecting, because the feedback that I got was that I didn't smile enough. And I was just so mad about that. Like, yes, there's feedback that everyone has feedback, that we're not perfect about what we're doing, but we need to be very careful about what we choose to tell people when we're giving feedback.
Do you have any tips for people around that, like how to construct good feedback? Sure.
I think it's probably something that sounds obvious, but it's not that obvious when you're putting it into practice. You need to always focus on their job performance, because there's stuff that you want to probably say that you don't like about someone. There's always something that you're not going to like about someone, but that it's not important. If this particular trait is affecting how they are portraying their work, then go ahead, but it's very important to take it one step at a time. Like, I had this coworker that would find it very hard to conceal his facial expressions. So whenever a client said something that he considered stupid, it would show on his face, which is something that you find really funny in a friend, but not in a colleague. So I had to be very careful on how I was going to tell him that, because it's not like I don't like how your face looks.
Yeah.
You need to control your facial expressions more, because you may be getting yourself into trouble with the clients that way. Like, we know you, we know that's how you are, the client doesn't. And so if you're getting into something so personal, you need to be very specific about why that is affecting their job, and not why you don't like it.
So I have a question that I ask like mentors and teachers and stuff, but I'm going to change how I ask this one a little bit. I would normally ask, like, as a mentor or teacher, what advice do you have for people new to the industry? But I want to change it up a little bit. And I'm thinking, why would you tell somebody, irrespective of background or gender or any of those things, just in general, why should somebody get into tech?
First, I think the best reason for getting into tech, and this is something that my parents and people that were trying to cheer me on when I was first going to choose a career for college, they told it to me a lot of times. Going into a tech career, doesn't mean you need to end up doing exactly what you studied, because it opens your mind to so much. Like, you can end up somewhere entirely different, but the fact that you have that base study makes it easier. Like, for example, I really liked writing when I was in high school, and a lot of people told me that I should go into that sort of career, like creative writing. Like, why waste my time in science if I was good at writing? And what people cheering me on told me was, like, you will always be able to write if you go into tech. But if you go into writing, you will not be able to do tech, because you did not go into math. You didn't take all of these other classes because it's more specific, it's science. And writing is it's easier to take on your own. And I was able to continue writing, and for a long time I wrote articles for blogs and stuff, and I haven't dropped anything that I liked to do before tech, but I would have probably dropped tech altogether if I had gone into any of those other things.
There's so many things one can talk about all these different challenges, but also the joys of being in tech. I think for me, one of the things that's really enjoyable is solving problems. I think if you like to take up, if you don't like to constantly have to face problems and solve them, then getting into the engineering tech industry is probably not for you, because that is a constant, and that is whether you're a designer or whether you're a coder, or whether you're a blend of the two. That is constantly what you're doing, is you're constantly solving problems, whether it is solving a user interface problem, whether you're solving a business problem, or whether you're solving something really engineering, like how do we ensure that this system will scale if tomorrow 1 million people start visiting our website? Like do we need a database? And if we do, which is the appropriate one? Like there's constant problem solving. There's constantly taking a thing, unpacking it, breaking it down into pieces, and then putting it all back together again with a solution. And I think another thing that's a big part of being in tech and being a coder and working with others is planning. And that's hard. I mean, I find that extremely hard. I find it not so hard to plan. I find it hard to estimate. And I know I'm not alone in that, but it's still a reality for me. Like after, 15 years of doing this, every sprint, I would think that I'll get a certain thing done. And by the end of the sprint, I'm like, I guess I underestimated again.
Yes, I think there's the incorrect notion that you don't need creativity to be a coder.
Oh, that's
there's so much of that. Yeah, because they think, oh, you're such squares and you're not creative. There's so much creativity and planning that goes into actually having scalable code and code that can be maintained by others and can grow. That I think the fact that we are so behind mathematics and diagrams and stuff, that it might put people off and give them the wrong idea. But it not only needs a lot of creativity, but it also helps people because like I said before, most of us have this profile that we're not good with people. But even if that's the case, tech helps you be good with people, because you need to understand them at a data level to actually build something that makes sense. So it makes you become better with people, even if you weren't at the beginning. That's something that I found really interesting, because you start seeing everything as a problem to solve, and dealing with people is also that at its basis.
It is. It's no, definitely. I was thinking of something and it slipped my mind now. I'll probably remember in a second. Are there any like projects or side projects, big personal projects, something that has nothing to do with tech that you're particularly proud of and would like to share a bit more about?
Well, I've always been proud of women who code, but that's entirely in tech. Right now we're like I said, we were trying to start a podcast about books, because I'm also, like I said, I started off being pushed into writing because I wrote a lot, and I still read a whole lot. Like I have this literature part of my personality that I just like analyzing whatever I read, and that's what we were starting, me and another friend. And I think the main reason it's been hard is because it's entirely in Spanish, and it gains less traction if it's not in English. But we wanted to still make it in Spanish for our community, because there's also something that makes you a bit sad about that tendency of making everything in English. Like you want to give something back in your own language, and that's why we have stuck to making it in Spanish and feeling more free that way. But we're a very small podcast, but I'm still very proud of all the work that we do of reading books and analyzing them and summarizing them and talking about how certain characters portray things from our society today or in history. And that's, like I said, is something I don't want to stop doing because it's very different from tech and connects me to another artistic world.
Yeah, that's very important to do that. I used to, before I got into tech, I used to be a professional musician, and I've let that go for a while, and I picked it up again. But then the other day I was listening to a podcast of Lex Friedman, and he also talked about how if you've been at a certain level with, it doesn't matter what, in my case, it's with a musical instrument, and you then stop for a long period of time and you pick it up, it's literally painful. The emotional pain you go through of realizing how much you've lost. And it's hard. It's almost, no, not almost. It is harder than when you first started. Because when you first started, you had nothing to compare yourself against other than other people. You can compare yourself against like a great guitarist, but that's cool. That's inspirational. But now you compare yourself against who you used to be able to, how you used to be able to play. And that is really painful because you pick up this piece of music and you're like, okay, I'm going to try this. And you just cannot. It's just too difficult. Your hands doesn't want to do it. Your brain doesn't want to play along. And you kind of have all of these mixed emotions that happens in your body. And you kind of just put it down because it's just too painful. So I do think that it's important to not let go of our hobbies, not let any one thing consume you entirely. Because balance is important in life, and you need different ways of giving expression to your emotions that you feel. And I mean, for some people, tech can fill all of those roles, and that's great. But I think if you do have other things, you shouldn't put them on the side just because now you're in tech, so that's where all your attention should be, and all your free time should also be spent on side projects and stuff like that. I think if that is your thing and it works for you and it makes you happy, then great. But if there are other things that you're interested in, you should continue to pursue them.
Yes, and it's very easy to get sucked into that mentality, because I think part of what social media has done is that it sort of portrays people in tech as always being consumed by tech. And you feel like you have to go that way. Like when I was fresh out of college, I had a blog, and that's what I was doing like 24/7, reading about tech and writing about tech, and even outside of my job. And I stopped reading, I stopped drawing, which I also liked, which is why I understand your pain, because I was very good at digital drawing. And when I picked it up again, I was so frustrated just looking back on what I had been able to do before. And like I said, if you go that way of consuming yourself entirely in tech, it has to be because you want to, not because you feel like that's what you have to do.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Pamela, this was a really, really good conversation. It was so wide, but it was really interesting, and I think it will be a good one for people to listen to. I probably had a different thing that I was going to ask you at the end, but I'm going to change that again because of something that you said. As an avid reader and somebody who loves books, clearly, what is your top three favorite books? Doesn't matter the language.
Oh my gosh,
doesn't matter the language.
That is so hard. That it sort of changes with the years, because, like, just to give you a perspective, this year I have read 93 books. So
wow.
It's hard for me to just outright give you just three.
Let's rephrase it. What is three books you've recently read that has really had an impact on you?
Yes, that's easier to answer. There's this book, because I also, apart from literature, I really like nonfiction. There's this book called No Man's Land that plays very well into what we were talking about right now, but more in the context of medicine and the First World War, how women were not even allowed to study medicine. And then suddenly there were no men because they were all fighting, and they needed women to get into these roles, and how this was the first rise of women in professional medicine, not confined to gynecology or to pediatricians. And it's a very, very interesting read. Not just because of that breakthrough in professional medicine for women, but because of what happened afterwards, that they were again pushed out. All of their hospitals closed and given to men, and how the fight didn't end there. That's one very good book, No Man's Land. For just general literature, there's this other book. It's fiction. It's called The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. You're probably seeing how I look for strong women characters, but it was a long time in my life where I didn't have access to that because everyone was a man, and I didn't realize it until now. It's this woman that suddenly is granted immortality, and how she navigates life that way, like fighting against this demon that gave her immortality, and he keeps telling her that he'll take it all away if she just surrenders, but she's so stubborn that she prefers to suffer through immortality than to say, okay, I give up. And I relate to that so much. And then just for anyone that has children, like I don't have children, but I'm about to. And there's this very nice series of books called Akata Witch by an African American author. It's a black girl from Nigeria who has albinism and has always had this identity crisis because they called her the white girl, but she's not technically white. She has albinism, and then she discovers that her disadvantage actually in another world gives her magical powers. Oh, wow. And it's the same for her friends, that one has dyslexia, and that means he's very good at spells in this other world. Like, I found it very uplifting that the fact that they have dyslexia or ADHD or albinism makes them better somewhere else. So if you have kids that are suffering through that, these are very good books for that.
That sounds incredible. Yeah. And I mean, I think that ties into reality, right? I think a lot of people, sometimes I don't want to say disability, I don't know, something that makes you disadvantaged maybe in one area can actually be a strength somewhere else. And I think it talks about this, it leads to this idea of there is something for all of us in this world. It's just finding that tribe, like what you talked about, finding that tribe, finding that passion, finding that field that just makes you happy. And I think then all these other things that goes around it, being having albinism or being ADHD or any of these things, they can actually become strengths when you don't. Also, sometimes when you don't see them as disadvantages, because I think oftentimes we see things as disadvantages and we kind of break ourselves down. And sometimes we have to ask the question of, but what does this give me? How does this give me a unique perspective on life that somebody who doesn't have to deal with this thing doesn't have? And what about that can I use to give myself an advantage in life? It's like looking at your disadvantages and asking yourself, what has that taught me about life, and how can I use those lessons to have an advantage over somebody that didn't have that challenge? I think you kind of hinted at that in the beginning as well with a lot of this, especially you having like a really hard time coming up as an engineer and in the engineering and science field in Mexico, in a third world country, whereas if you speak to somebody in the US, they might have a completely different experience because there's a bigger support system. It's more visible. Other people that is similar to you. And I think these books that you also find that you feel so close to, I think they're filling a void that's been there before, where there wasn't this representation of these strong females that is taken on the world, taken on a demon and won. So yeah, I think it's really, really interesting. I can keep talking and talking, but at some point, I guess we have to stop. So thanks so much for joining, Pamela. I really, really enjoyed it. All of the best with everything you do. Thanks so much for all the things you do. I think it's really, really important work. And I hope that this small little podcast that I run gives you a bit of makes people a little bit more aware of the stuff you do, and gets you a little bit more recognition and helps other people join in. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a great conversation.
Thank you for listening to the Mycelium Network podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Have something to add? Continue the conversation on GitHub and join the community on Slack. Until the next one, keep making the web awesome.